and stuff. Today, I'm waiting on some computer stuff to do stuff, and I've been humping butt on the last week. I'm writing a book, and I used to be a computer programmer a long time ago, and the other day I finally tripped back into, I don't know, a mindset that I used to use when I was doing computer programming. Now, computer programming, so this whole title today is about writing, using words to try to convey something or describe something or whatever. And I am not, disclaimer time, I don't know, except from the computer programming background, I think it gives me some experience and insight that may be valuable to others. And most people have not written computer programs, so they don't realize what is involved there. And I'm going to quickly cover it and then try to make links from that to putting words on paper to write something that maybe you're trying to convey a thought or a point or explore a particular area or domain of thought or an idea. Anyway, computer programming. Computer languages primarily consist of nouns and verbs. You can define any noun you want, and then there are various defined verbs that you can use on your defined nouns. You can add them, subtract them, you can this, that. There are lots and lots of functions, which are verbs, that you can perform, like give me a random number generator, and that is a verb, and it will provide something that you can use then in programming. Or definitional verb, do loop, old starter loop. The code inside of the loop will repeat until end of loop. Something inside the code says, okay, I've done this enough times, end the loop. It's a verb. Verbs work on the nouns you defined. You can define what is a noun, a parameter, say temperature. And you define the word temperature, and it has a meaning. And so use that from there on, and take the temperature. If the temperature is greater than this, you have conditional statements as well. Besides nouns, verbs, you have conditional statements. If the temperature is greater than 65, then do this. That sort of thing. Programming. Nouns, verbs, looping, and conditional statements. There's probably more aspects to it than that, and I've forgotten. But the point is that when you do that programming, you're probably trying to do it at some sort of function level. You want to create some sort of function. So when you use that function, it does something specific. Okay? Once it's defined what function you want to create, then you test it, you run it, and see if that function behaves like you wanted it to. And if it does, then you know the code is working. The idea is you're trying to get a point or a theme or a function, and you write the code and you play with the code until that function does what you wanted it to do. Okay, in writing it's very similar. First thing you do is you try to put words in orders and break them in sections and so on until you think you have accomplished the point of sentences, paragraphs, chapters, whatever they are. If you're trying to make a point, like an argument, you know, you're arguing against abortion or for abortion or something like that, and you're creating a document that is trying to convey a particular point of view, then that's the goal or the function of the writing. And the first thing you do is try to get it to work. It conveys, you think it conveys what you want to convey. Okay, now hop back to computer programming. It's very clear in that condition if the function works or not. It either does or it doesn't. If you want something to come out of it, an output out of it, it's rather clear. Code's kind of sticky about that. If you put the wrong instruction in or you make an error of some kind, you're going to get bad results, and you can see that. Usually you can see it. Okay, and you have to modify your code to get it correct. When it comes to putting words to paper to convey a particular idea or theme or whatever, it's a lot more difficult to determine if you have accomplished the function that you started off to create. Have you made your point? Have you gotten across the theme? Have you opened enough of a can of worms that the reader has to ponder, has to think? That sort of. It's very more difficult to determine if you've accomplished that with words. And even though you have a defined idea of what you're trying to get across, it's much harder with just simple words than it is computer code. Okay, but once you think you have it written down, you think you've got it, your point across in the use of words, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, whatever. Back to computer code. Okay, you've got it working. You know it works. Okay, well, in computer code, long time ago, there was always a space factor had to be considered in. You could get it working, but it was taking 1 megabyte of memory, and that's too much. You don't have that much of memory. You have memory, but you can't use 1 megabyte of it just for this function. So you have to go back and look at your code and see where possibly you could remove various steps or instructions, or change what nouns you use. You have to shrink it. There is that you get it working first, and then you go back and look to see how can you shrink it, or how can you combine it with something else, and yeah, the total memory space of 2 functions, you can shrink those 2 functions into 1 and reduce your overall memory usage space by some factor. Okay, so there's always a shrinking going on. Same concept applies to writing with words. You can go back, and the first edit is, how can I eliminate some of the words? And most sentences, you can reorder various words and drop a word here or there without any impact on that particular sentence or the point you're trying to make. I found that out. It was taught to me by a retired lawyer from the Office of Management and Budget in the United States government, and he was a lawyer, so he was real good at saying, well, you know, you can take this word out of this, move this around, drop that and, put a comma here, and you can shrink the overall size of what you're trying to convey. And the more concise and compact it is, I think it is valid to say the reader can more easily determine what you're trying to say, and it's less chunky, I want to call it that way. Back to computer code, you do your edit to shrink it down in size. Okay, upon farther review, you'll find certain areas of code which are functioning, But upon review, you have a little trouble remembering exactly what it's doing and why did you do it that way. And it appears chunky. It works, but it's chunky. And there's got to be a better way to take this little section and rework it, rethink it, and make it, if you will, more elegant. It is not as clumsy, not as difficult to understand upon review. And when I say review, I would often write code. It would work. I would do the edit to reduce it in size. I would go on to other modules. I would go on to other pieces of code. And a week later, I would come back and be reviewing things, and I would find a big chunky code that was like, well, yeah, but it ought to be a better way. It works, but it's chunky and a little difficult for even me, the creator, to understand exactly the process that's going on. So it's chunky. It doesn't feel right. So I added that chunky piece and made it more concise. I may have reduced the number of instructions. That also helped in the memory usage area. I may have taken that chunky piece and broken it into sub-pieces that were more concise and I could understand them well better. And part of computer coding is, or writing programs, is documentation. Because somebody else may come along and look at your code, and if they can't understand it, they can't maintain it. So you would have to write chunks of code and then put some documentation which would describe what is it doing. What is this piece of code, the next 14 lines, supposed to do? And how did it do it? And I know that sounds absurd, but after a year, even me, if I came back and looked at that code, I might have difficulty in what exactly was I doing there. I sort of understand it, but it doesn't seem right. So with notes, it would help, and I would understand without having to, you know, looking at somebody else's code is one of the hardest things in the world to do if they haven't documented it, because you have to sort through what is this doing, why is he doing that, this seems odd, that seems odd, he's got a loop here, I don't know why he needed a loop, you know. Anyway, you go back through and computer code, you're editing and looking for the chunky pieces which are not easily understood by you or somebody 2 years from now or whatever, and you clean up that chunky piece and you document, you know, not crazy, but you document at least enough so that someone in the future could understand what exactly you intended and how you did it in that piece. Alright, switch back to words to paper. You have edited for overuse of words in the sentence. You can just change the order of words and drop out a word here or there, and it still conveys the same meaning. Okay, you set it aside, you come back and you look at it a week later, and this time you go through and you look for chunkies. Yeah, I can see that it conveys sort of what I was trying to do, but it's not crisp. It's not very clear, not very clean. It's chunky, and you need to look at that chunky section and see, well, how can I rewrite it? It is describing what I wanted to describe, but there's got to be some better, more elegant way. And maybe mathematics comes in for me, but mathematics, write an equation, and it can be very elegant. It is a minimum of parameters, it is the minimum of operators, pluses, minuses, square roots, and there's a certain elegance to it. There's no excess, okay? Well, in writing, you're just putting words to paper and trying to convey a thought or lay groundwork for an impending point of some kind. The chunky areas, you'll see them, you'll feel them when you read through. There's a chunky here. It just doesn't flow correctly. And I want to describe that as chunky. And so you'll do some editing you know, in that chunky area, and hopefully minimize it a little bit in terms of the number of words used. You might have to break it into more sentences. You might have to break it into paragraphs. Something which helps correct the chunkiness of the wording. Okay. So back to computer programming. I've now got it to work. I've reviewed it, and because of my memory issues, I only have so much space. I have to go back and edit and shrink it. And once I edit and shrink it, then I look at it sometime later, and I find that certain areas are like difficult to understand, and I even did it. And so it's chunky, and I have to break it apart or rewrite it or do it and eventually come up with a more elegant way to accomplish what the purpose was for that particular function or subroutine or whatever you want to call it, paragraph, sentence. Writing the same way. I have in editing for this book, I've even taken out whole chunks that was written up here and moved it way down there and consolidated it with another thought stream I had at the time. And yeah, I had introduced it up here, and that was okay. The reader got the idea, but I felt it would be better understood and less chunky if I combined it and moved it. That's all true, also true in computer coding. Sometimes you might want to create a routine that hadn't existed but would help you, you know, it's used all the time. That's part of computer programming. You're defining modules and routines that can be used over and over again. And if you do that in the correct way, it reduces the overall memory usage of the program and makes it less modules to have to deal with and understand. And if they're documented as how they work together and play together, then that's the point. All right, back to just putting words to paper and writing in such a way as to convey a point. Introduce a concept, introduce some sort of wording which you're trying to get the reader to ponder or think about. And I have read a lot of books. I haven't read, there's a lot of books in the world. But sometimes I'll stumble into a book and every sentence is so thick with meaning. I have to read it really slowly because it really punches. Now, you can say it might have been reduced, it's overall, it might have been reduced to the point of too complex. That sentence is too complex for an average reader to understand. He has to go so slow. That may be considered chunky. On the other hand, I find it amazing that one sentence can convey so much. And the fact that I do have to slow down and think about it is okay with me. Some people would find that difficult and would just, you know, if they stumble across a number of those sort of sentences, they would say, this is too hard for me. And I've heard, you know, I can run the same thing if I pick up a book on electrohydrodynamics or something, which is very technically complex, and not having enough background in the subject matter. Each sentence is a struggle to totally understand. And that has to do with the creation of nouns. You don't think about it, but, you know, words and nouns, verbs. Computer world, you have technical terms, and it always has technical terms. And each has a definition, and it's real helpful, almost required, that you understand what the definition is of this or that. What is the definition of this particular mathematical function? What is it? What does it represent? What does that function do to anything? You know, like an integral symbol. or a summation symbol. What you need to know what that symbol represents. And in the end, you know, words are just symbols, and you're combining a bunch of symbols, symbolic, you know, W, O, and R. Those are just symbols, but when combined together, they can create a higher level. You know, you create a word with a definition, cat. Okay, it's interesting, and I'm going to divert a minute, but we all have the definition of a cat, but they're not the same depending on your experience with cats. If I don't have any experience with cats and how they act and so on, a cat, I know what it looks like. I've seen cats, but that may be the extent of my knowledge. When I see a cat, I know it's a cat, and that's in the story. If you have owned a cat for 30 years, you know a lot more about a cat, and so the definition of a cat means a lot more to you than someone who has never owned a cat. That's true with every word you can think of, every noun, true with even verbs. Kill can mean a whole lot or a little bit. Somebody who's only ever, and I don't know if they even ever use that word, they step on an ant, they killed an ant. That's a whole lot different meaning than if you actually have killed another human being. Okay? So when you're putting these words together to convey a thought, or trying to provoke thought, or making a point or whatever, it is difficult to understand what every reader's definition of a particular word is. The cat scratched his leg. The cat definition, no, cats don't scratch legs. You know, that's not right. Would depend on the reader. Now, there's some impossibility. You cannot take into account somehow the definitional aspects of every reader. You can't do that. It's too varied. So somewhat you have to go in the middle of the road on these things. Everybody's vocabulary is not the same. If you throw in a word that might be perfect for your description because you know the definition, other readers may not know that word at all, and they don't take the time to look it up or think about it, and they just dismiss it. Now, there is contextual understanding in a sentence. If they run across a word they do not understand, they can sort of figure out what the meaning of that word is, and we all do that from a contextual, what is its context. If I say slither, just that word, it will evoke something in your understanding, but it may not be the slither I'm trying to convey. Anyway, there are difficulties in writing words. It is much more difficult to just use words and sentences and verbs and adjectives and punctuation and so on to create the coded function that you're desiring. It is much more difficult because you don't know if it works or not. With computer code, first thing you do is get it to work. It does what I wanted it to do. When you're writing something and just using chunks, word chunks, and putting them in such an order, and trying to convey something, create a function, create an environment, create an image, create a event. It's much more difficult to know if it really works for your reader. It's not the same. It is much more difficult. And the only thing I think that works here is what I did with code is you can do something, you write it, you have to walk away from it. And I'm talking maybe hours, days, weeks. And upon review, you will identify areas that you can shrink. You'll identify chunky pieces which need some refinement perhaps. some goal of a more elegant presentation. What does elegant mean? Varies from person to person. Elegant, you know, like an elegant lady. You know what that is. Elegant comes to mind. In my sense, elegant is mathematical. Elegant, it is concise, compact, no extraneous anything, and you totally understand it by looking at it. That is difficult in putting words to paper to try to convey something, create an argument, describe, create a scene, you know, all of the parameters of the setting by the lake. Just describe sitting by the lake and trying to put your reader at the lake and feeling it in some way. That's more difficult. Okay, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to relate my experience of computer coding to writing. And as I said, the other day it was interesting. I stumbled upon my editing skills that I had long time ago used on computer code, and it was working. And that's one of the things about computer coding. There are days when I would be writing code, and it just wouldn't work. Whatever I put down, it just, yeah, but no, it just wouldn't work. It wasn't working. And the best thing I could do was just do something else. Walk away from it, do something else. I have found in writing, trying to write a story or explain something, same way I do when I try to get on here, I find it's best to just walk away. It's not working. And when it does work, however, when things are working right for somehow, computer programming, I would run it till it dried up. If it went hours and hours and hours, but it was working, I would flow with it. Same is true on writing, some days it just doesn't work. You're trying to describe a particular scene, you're trying to convey feelings between two people, and it just doesn't work. And the best thing to do is do something else completely different. I mean, get up from that and go over here and wash your dishes, or go outside and rake the leaves. Something completely, entirely different. Clear your mind of that, and then come back to it later, be it a day, an hour, a week. And you'll look at it with fresh eyes, and you should either be able to see where you can eliminate words, reorder the sentence, just moving words around, or you will find that chunky piece, that chunky sentences or several sentences or paragraph or even a whole chapter that needs a rewrite or an edit. It's just, and again, it is difficult. I find it very difficult to know if what I wrote is hitting the mark. Is it functioning? Is it going to convey to the reader what I wanted to get across? With computer code, it either works or it doesn't. It's easy in that perspective. Difficult to write code that works. I'm not saying that. But when you're writing literature, if you want to call it that, I find it much more difficult to know if I have been successful in conveying whatever I'm trying to describe, whatever overall point I'm trying to make, whatever argument that I'm wording, summarizing. Anyway, enough of this. This is about writing and my past computer code. And there are, like I say, the other day I stumbled back in and I was really happy with it. My editing ability from the old computer coding days, and it was really working well, and I ran with it for a long time. I mean, I could just look at the words I had on paper in this book, and I could see where I could edit it, should edit it, refine it, chunk word, throw words out, throw a whole sentence out, cut a sentence down in size, move a sentence around, move a paragraph up and down, delete a whole paragraph. It's just not needed. You know, I thought it was, but it's extraneous upon review. It doesn't add anything. You know, it was like, I don't know why was I going off on that tangent? It's not going to go anywhere. It really hasn't added anything to the story. Sometimes I think I've done that to add, the thinking is adding some depth to a scene or an event. And in fact, it's not needed, you know. Anyway, Uncle Ron and stuff. This is the 19th of June, 2024. I continue to do these things. I don't know, you know. I don't know. Anyway, Uncle Ron and stuff. This is about the book that I've been writing and some of the experiences I've had out of it. And I will say in the end that writing, this is 300 pages of writing, that it is very difficult. And even at the end, I'm not sure that it hits the mark, that those short stories and muses that I have put together in what I think is a decent order of presentation are actually going to evoke, provoke, convey, I don't know, what I was trying to get across in that particular subroutine of a story, that particular module of a muse, or overall the context of the entire book. Got to have some overall character to the book. What is the character? What is the how does it feel? What is it? Does it smell a certain way? Does it give off a color? I don't know. Uncle Ron and stuff. I am done for the day. I apologize as always. I put the disclaimer on it as always. I don't know. Going to be stored somewhere for a long time. Bye bye.